I'm excited about this one. I'm excited about this deep dive. And yes, I am fully aware of the needless, though completely accidental pun in the Descent deep dive. I think it's great. Wish there was a way I could capitalize on it. The Descent is remarkable. It's absolutely brilliant. It's most definitely within my top three horror films ever made. It is so stunning, so incredible, and I'm going to explain just how complicated it really is without being overtly symbolic or ostentatious, even remotely. Neil Marshall is a very, very, very capable filmmaker. I also love Dog Soldiers, but it's nowhere near as brilliant as The Descent, which stars Shauna Macdonald and Natalie Mendoza in two of the finest performances that the horror genre has ever seen, just absolutely. So these deep dives are off the cuff, they're unscripted, they don't have bullet points. I want them to be a bit more organic feeling, a bit more like you're actually inside of my kind of manic brain and we're just figuring out the brilliance together. But there's a quote in The Descent, and it's a brilliant quote. I believe it's spoken by Beth, and it's, "What are you afraid of? What are you so afraid of? The worst thing that could have happened to you has already happened, and you're still here." So let's use that as a jumping off point. Neil Marshall's The Descent is a film about depression, about descending into melancholia. It's a film about excavating misery. It's about being trapped inside of sorrow, inside of the most hyper-intensified version of gloom. The cave that these characters go into represent Sarah's grief, her despondency, her hopelessness, her despair. That is what the cave represents, and we're diving deeply into it as she just becomes more hopeless as a human being. She has to figure out a way to overcome this terrible tragedy that has befallen her, which of course is losing her husband and child in a car accident. Neil Marshall even uses this motif of her child celebrating a birthday and perverts it near the end by transforming her into a monster. But that's really what Sarah has done with her own idealized form of her daughter in her mind, has made her into an icon of despair, of depression. So that's what The Descent is about. But it's really about two women facing depression. And I think that is simply incredible just to think about. Because the meaning is apparent and obvious in the film's title alone. It's called The Descent. And oftentimes when we use words like descend or descent, or try to express the feeling of depression, it's a sinking feeling. Because there's something beneath even just simple sadness. There's something beneath emotional decline. There's despondency. There are monsters and there are demons there. But it's about two women's battles with depression, with overcoming this depression and how they choose to do it. Sarah and Juno, who Juno also lost something in the crash as well. I thought it was wonderful by Neil Marshall. It is heavily implied that Juno was having an affair with Sarah's husband, but it's never directly said. But the audience is fully understanding of the implications involved with these visual motifs, with these kind of nuanced tells that Juno is also going through a great, great loss. Going to the cave was Juno's idea. In fact, Sarah at one point questions Juno, "Is this about me or you?" To which Juno responds, "It's about us." In fact, Juno wants to conquer her depression, whereas Sarah simply just wants to regain her humanity, her spirit, her heart. Juno wants to conquer her depression and name it. She talks about naming this cave, with quotes of, "If anyone had been down here and made it out, they would have already named it." Speaking of the cave, so Juno's way of overcoming depression is by completely conquering it, by destroying it, by coming out as the champion, as the warrior hero. Whereas Sarah just wants to simply be a woman again. There is a theory about monsters that they become less scary when you're able to identify them. So Juno's not completely wrong. If you could name something, it loses its mystery, and it loses some of its power, and you gain that power because you have authority over it by naming it. But Neil Marshall doesn't just stop here at this very emotional subtext to an entirely brutal horror film. He doesn't just stop there. It's not just an emotionally multi-layered film. Its complexities don't just rely on emotions. He also telegraphs what I'm talking about, with it being about Juno and Sarah specifically overcoming depression through the use of color theory and Jungian psychology. So when they go into the cave, and then before, he assigns colors to these two women, and they're two very interesting colors, and it goes along with primary-based color theory within film and popular art. Juno is in red, and Sarah is in blue. That's wonderful. That is great. So right there, we are being shown they are being positioned as dialectical opposites. Juno and Sarah. Sarah being blonde, blue-eyed, Juno being jet black hair, very dark eyes. Also, Sarah has a Scottish accent, and Juno is an Australian actress, but she is doing a American accent in this film. So that even provides even more of an opposition, of a dissimilarity between these two women. And both women are absolutely attractive in their own way. Sarah is very traditionally attractive. She's, like I said, blonde, blue eyes, very plain, but also very pretty at the same exact time, whereas Juno has an unmistakably exotic appeal to her. There is something different about Juno. She is a bit ambiguous when it comes to race or country of origin, even. It's a far more exotic, far more mysterious, and I think that makes it an inherently more renegade, kind of blitzkrieg kind of appeal. Absolutely deliriously gorgeous. Mendoza is just stunning to look at. It's always good in horror movies where you could have women who are stunning to look at. That always helps. So this color theory is amazing, and since going to the cave was Juno's idea, this film has some of the best lighting I've ever seen. Not some of. Scratch that. Mark it. Overrule it. It has the best lighting I've ever seen in a horror film. Neil Marshall went out of his way to make the lighting just perfect. You see just enough. You see exactly what Neil Marshall wants you to see. A lot of the times it's obscured. Other times you're seeing far too much to make you comfortable. But more than that, the lighting is expressive in a way that Dario Argento's lighting as well, like in Suspiria, is extremely expressive. This one expresses the same primary-based color theory that I've been talking about. So when we're inside of the cave, I'm going to call that Juno's void. We're inside of her unhappiness, her sadness. The lighting is red. It's completely red. We are in Juno's world. This is how Juno wants to play this out. And we are completely in red lighting. And it's absolutely incredible. The decision to make that kind of expressive lighting, because it gives you the same kind of energy that you have placed upon Juno, but we're subconsciously associating the red lighting of the film, of the first at least half of the film, maybe even more than half, or associating the first hour of the film with Juno's energy, because subconsciously you have placed her in a red shirt. You have placed her as the symbol of the color red. So we are looking at this cave and we are thinking of Juno without realizing that we are, because it is mirroring, it is paralleling Juno's energy. So when we're inside of that cave, of that void, of that darkness, with the only light being Juno's light, and she is, for most of the movie, she is the only sign of forward momentum. She is pushing the story, the narrative along, and she's also, for most of the movie, the strongest person there. She is a fighter and a warrior, and she's brutal as fuck. So when we're submerged in that red, we are in Juno's energy. And Sarah is allowing her to take the lead, which adds to the Jungian psychology, which I'll get at near the end. So to have primary-based color theory, you do need something else as well. You need red, Juno, you need blue, Sarah, but you also need green. And in order for primary-based color theory to work, green has to imply something different. It can't just signify another character or another scenario or just a kind of vapid situation. It actually has to mean a blending of the two characters. And I know what you're thinking, it should be purple because we mixed those together, but I'll get to that. That actually does have a payoff as well, the more practical-based color theory. But for primary-based color theory, Neil Marshall also completely succeeds in expressing that, because we do get green. But we don't get the color green, which symbolizes the blending of the two already pre-existing symbolic motifs, which is red and blue, so Juno and Sarah. We don't get green in the film until the monsters appear. We get green originally through the use of the night vision on the camera. And another character is using it. So that even drives the point home even more brilliantly, more psychotically brilliantly, because it's a blending of the two. So we are looking at these two women through the eyes of others, and through the eyes of others, they are green because they are the same. They are blending, they are coalescing, they have the same grief. That is fucking phenomenal. That is so poetic, I'm almost gonna have a heart attack because of it. We also see green in the artificial flares, the synthetic, glow stick, but the artificial flares that they use within the cave. And Neil Marshall is so intelligent that sometimes even positions these flares in between Juno and Sarah during scenes of exposition. So there is green to represent the blending of red and blue, the coming together, the shared pathos, the shared pity of Juno and of Sarah. And green is first established as an expressive symbolic lighting scheme through the guise and the gaze of others. This is how other people view their shared misery. And that green, the initial sighting of green, when their spirits blend, when their sadness comes together, that signals the first onslaught. That signals fucking carnage. And these monsters are cavemen. They are primal. And I think it's extremely telling that we also hear baby noises to cue this motif, because that's Sarah's internalized, unimaginable grief that also signals this in. So these demons are nothing else if not completely metaphorical, completely symbolic of what is in the darkest, blackest voids of human depression. It's something incredibly primal, like a caveman. It's something that hasn't evolved because it hasn't needed to. There's enough food for it to eat. There's enough fucking heartache in our souls for it to feast on. that it never had to evolve, and these things are monsters. This movie is about fighting your demons. It's about facing your demons in their own home, in the blackest corners of depression, in that darkest, most tragic cave. That is what this film is about. And these monsters loom in green. Because interestingly, another fucking fascinating thing is that after that initial onslaught, there are two characters who continue to use the green artificial flares. And it's still mostly green from then on, but Juno continues to be in that red lighting. She continues to possess her own energy because she is unchanged. She is not changing. In fact, this is almost reinforcing or adding to her own punishment, her own misery, because she completely accidentally kills Rebecca because Juno is going fucking savage on all these goddamn monsters, and then she hears someone walk up behind her, she turns around, whips her fucking pickaxe really quick, and boom, gets Rebecca right in the fucking neck, and she bleeds to death. Dropping a keychain, which is telling of the implied betrayal that happened between Juno and Sarah. So this is reinforcing, or just multiplying Juno's own depression, Juno's own woe, her own sorrow and misery. It's awful. On the other hand, Sarah is becoming strong. She's becoming a hero. She's possessing strength. She's becoming a survivor. A very complicated survivor. She's getting stronger. In fact, she's the one who has to finish Juno's job, because Juno left Rebecca to bleed to death. Sarah has to finish it. She has to finish the job that her dialectical opposite could not follow through with. She has to put Rebecca out of her misery, and then immediately gets swamped, gets ambushed by these cavemen, primordial monsters, these symbols of raw, the anger, the self-hate of depression. She gets trampled by these monsters, falls into a vat, a pool of blood, of red liquid, of red water. So she is becoming that energy of Juno. And it's here that you must start to think, okay, so maybe this is not a film about two different individual and unique women battling and overcoming depression. Maybe it's about one. Maybe it's only about Sarah, because by falling into that red pool, she gets Juno's energy out of nowhere. She gets her energy, meaning she gets that warrior fighting, dangerous spirit, that renegade blitzkrieg spirit that I was referencing, talking about earlier. She gets that. She becomes Juno's rage, because that's what Juno is. She is that passion. She is that raw rage passion. And Sarah does not possess this kind of ferocity, this fierceness, until she falls into a red pool, a red vat. And then she becomes a warrior, unstoppable, unbreakable, changed, because she becomes her shadow archetype. And now we're getting into Jungian psychology. So in Jungian psychology, there's an idea of a shadow archetype, and what it's meant to express is that darker part of you. In fact, essentially the darkest part of you that you're not even cognizant of. You're not even aware that it exists at all in your universe. But it's you, and it's all the darker aspects of you. Sarah's shadow archetype is Juno. From the beginning of this film, Neil Marshall has set up these two women as dialectical opposites, as two ends of a spectrum, but on opposite ends. So they're opposite poles on this spectrum. And now let's view all of the other women, all the extraneous supporting characters. The supporting cast is everything in the middle. And you can look at it as a color spectrum as well, with Sarah being at the most passive end, the most despondent, lifeless end because of the tragedy that she experienced. going all the way up, and it's getting more and more raucous, more and more emotional, expressive, and hypersensitive, because we get the thrill seeker with the short hair who's just jumping, who does free jumps all the time, base jumping, all that shit. You get all these different kinds of women with who express different amounts of carelessness, of recklessness, of rage, of blitzkrieg passion, until you get to Juno, who is the epitome of passion, the epitome of that. Her red lips, her jet black hair, her red outfit, the fact that she's always in red lighting, she is the color red, she is passion, whereas blue is neutral and cool and passive. And that's Sarah. So we have two opposite ends of an emotional grid. And each character in the middle represents a different emotional step, all leading up towards Juno. And Sarah has to make that journey. She has to consolidate her shadow archetype. She has to consolidate Juno within herself to become that full woman again after the tragedy that happened to her family. She has to incorporate Juno's passion, Juno's rage, her blitzkrieg fucking rage into her own human character, into her own condition. And she does just that. And that's a huge turning point for her. And she screams in that vat of blood, too. She screams in that red after she's turned into this warrior woman, after she's incorporated Juno's psychology into her own, after she's incorporated Juno's identity, her hyper-intensified personality into her own. She screams like she's exorcising a demon. It's fascinating. The green even becomes a little less overwhelming, because the green was about the shared experience between red and blue, between Juno and Sarah, the shared experience of their grief as demonstrated by the monster's onslaught, their appearance and their carnage. Green as a symbolic, expressive value does make another appearance, and it's wonderful because where Sarah falls into a vat of red, a vat of Juno's energy, Juno, shortly thereafter, she has a submersive experience too within water, but she has that artificial green glow stick. So when she's submerged, when Juno is submerged, it's green. It's the blending of the two colors. And she battles, but she is getting weaker. She's getting tired. She's getting more afraid, and she's having more grief, more sadness just piled onto her because of accidents. Accidents. You can't help who you fall in love with. You can't help who you betray sometimes. And she could not help but kill Rebecca. That was an accident. And no one should blame her for that. She is in that green, and it's the shared experience. It's incredibly symbolic that Juno was the one submerged in that coming together color, in that symbolic color of coalescence. It is in that hue of togetherness, of shared grief, of blends, of green. It's in that fateful hue that Juno begins to lose her control of the picture, because she is our driving force, but now Sarah is far stronger than Juno. Far stronger. Green is the shared universe of depression. Depression is what you share with your shadow archetype. And it's what destroys all those other amazing traits and characteristics that make up who you are until you have nothing left but your shadow. And that's what it comes down to. It comes down to the wire. It comes down to Juno and Sarah as the last two women standing. And Juno has to fall. Sarah has to overcome her shadow archetype. She has to defeat it. Because Juno is the most dangerous, most vicious demon in that cave. The most vicious monster she has to overcome. And like I said, Neil Marshall and I, we do not vilify Juno. We think she's perfectly understandable, sympathetic, beautiful. But for Sarah to complete her arc, to complete this psychological and symbolic arc, she has to do away with Juno. Because it's Juno that drug her down into that cave of depression, because it's your passions, it's your hyper emotions that bring you down deeper and deeper into that descent of madness and sorrow. And she has to get rid of it. They fight these monsters together. They both do a very good job of it. And then they stare each other down, and Sarah's different now. Juno can see that she possesses a different kind of energy, a different kind of vibe or sphere around her. And Sarah wounds Juno, stabs her right in the leg, axes her down, cripples her, and leaves her there to be eaten alive. Though I might posit, and I would like to think, that Juno is well aware that these monsters, they can't see, because they've never needed to develop the ability of sight. They hunt by hearing. They hunt by sonic means. And I think that Juno sonically sacrifices herself, because we hear her scream. And I think that that's to get them distracted. Because your shadow archetype likes you. According to Jungian psychology, your shadow archetype admires you very much. I like to think that Juno self-sacrificed herself in order for Sarah to escape. Because Sarah is stronger now. Because she's incorporated Juno's spirit into her own in a cognizant and an aware way. And remember that practical color theory I was talking about? Red and blue make purple. Well, we're going to see the finalization of that amazing concept. Because it's not simply primary-based color theory, it's the totality of color theory. So when Sarah finally escapes, we see her hand reach out, and she's covered in blood, right? So she's red and she's blue, because she has been wearing blue jeans. So we see the red on her blonde hair that has basically dyed it, and we see her blue jeans, but her shirt, which was blue before and has since been covered in that pool of blood. Red and blue make purple. Her shirt is purple, which indicates, which perfectly visually demonstrates that she and Juno are the same person now. That she is stronger, that she is her shadow archetype, but she has incorporated her shadow to make her a stronger, more complete woman. And what's around her? Earth, nature, green, natural green. So once again, we get all we get all four colors in one. We get blue jeans, we get the red blood in her blonde hair and dribbling off her skin, we get the purple on the shirt, and we get the green of the earth, the coming together of everything, the oneness, the blend, the earth, the nature. But it's a horror movie. It's a horror movie, all right. So she gets out and she finds a truck, a blue truck. Thought we were over this, containing ourselves within the very passive state. She gets in a blue truck and she weeps. And it's a very human, sad cry. As she starts the engine, she drives off, and Neil Marshall makes it very obvious that there is rope on the front of the truck. Perhaps does this signify that she is tied down again to her passivity, to her despondency, to the blue? Well, you can make a case for it, because the movie does not end with a jump scare of a monster. She escaped those monsters, those caveman fucking demon spawns. She escaped them. And this also supports my theory that Juno was the most vicious creature in that cave, the most dangerous element of the whole film, and that's why she's her shadow archetype. It ends with a jump scare of Juno in the passenger seat of the truck, looking at her in a beautiful tinted shadow lighting. This completely finalizes the shadow archetype. She has not ridden herself entirely of her shadow archetype yet, and now her shadow knows that she's different, and it will always follow her everywhere that she goes. This completely supports all of my theories in this video. In fact, it drives the fucking nail in the coffin. She's in the car in shadow. The jump scare is not a monster. The jump scare is Juno. Because Juno is Sarah's shadow archetype. It's incredible. The true boogeyman at the center of Neil Marshall's masterwork of depression is your shadow archetype. And Natalie Mendoza is an extremely fucking pulverizingly fucking beautiful, sexy woman. She's fucking heart-stopping, jaw-dropping. She's fucking perfect. Your shadow archetype will always be infinitely more attractive than you are to the outside world. In fact, maybe we can apply some symbolic reasoning to her husband's death, to Sarah's husband's death. Perhaps her husband was flirting with reckless ideas, with impatience. Maybe her husband was feeling impassioned. Her husband was feeling a bit like a Roman candle of red. Shadow archetypes will eat you alive, and it's not their fault. You can't blame them. You can't blame Juno for any of her actions in this film. The shadow archetypes are not shadows, are not dialectical opposite because they want to be. Shadow archetypes are the fault of the psychology that they were made by. Juno was made by Sarah. Neil Marshall's The Descent deviates from the normative creature feature to convey worlds, universes of emotional meaning, of humanity, in expressive lighting that envelops all of these characters, all of these archetypes. It's completely gorgeous. At the beginning of this video, I said that this was my number 3 favorite, or it was in my top 3, so I guess I'm not changing that, but it's my number 2. This film's unstoppable, and it's complicated, and it's complex. And I believe that this analysis was made on solid ground. I had a color theory template to work from. These are non-accidental. You do not use primary color-based theory accidentally. This was completely orchestrated, and it was gorgeous. Neil Gaiman made the most complicated horror film, one of the more complicated ones, more meaningful ones that I've ever seen, more striking, more potent, more human, more poignant. It's incredible, yeah. All these women are all inside one. It's her different characteristics, with Juno being the hardest one to incorporate into herself, into her one self. And it's about a battle you'll always have to overcome your shadow archetype, because it will always be there in different forms. But you have to incorporate it into your own human spirit. Wow. I love The Descent. And I'm stoked about this analysis. I think it's great. I think this was a great deep dive. I was really excited about this one. The Descent owns me, man. It's a great movie. It's a perfect horror film with a lot of complexities. And if you're not too busy, fight your own demons off by clicking the like button. Also, if you're not subscribed yet, you should definitely subscribe if this is your first time to the channel. My name is Zachary Conan, and here we talk about art house and horror films. So if this is your thing, definitely follow it, subscribe. Follow me on Twitter at caricature of Zach. Share this video if you think anyone else would be interested in hearing a more analytical discussion of The Descent. And definitely comment. Tell me what you think. Tell me the first times you saw this movie, the emotions it drew out of you, because what you remember most about this film is character work, which I think is fantastic, and lights and colors and hues and moods.